regarding LastPass. One of the things that's come up from this is about the importance of having a really, really strong master password for your safe. And this just goes for any password, in fact. If you've got a site that you need to protect, then you need to have a strong password that can't get cracked by the advances in technology or guessed by some hacker. Today, I want to explore exactly why you should do this, how you should do it, and give you some really practical and simple advice of creating awesome, memorable passwords for all of your apps and software. Cool. So today I want to talk about passwords because this comes up all the time on my coaching calls. I've got clients and also my staff, in fact, I'll hold my hands up, that where I've learned they have got such bad management policies or whatever around their passwords. We've got people who have spreadsheets with all their passwords saved in. We've got people who created sticky notes on their desktop and then put all their passwords in there so they could copy them, paste them in, or people that write them down in a book and they have it sort of on their desk for anyone to sort of stumble across and find. And often this is quite secure stuff like banking passwords or email passwords, which basically gives you access to everything, or you just passwords for all of your CRMs, data protection warnings and all that coming up when I think about this stuff. And so there's lots of us that have bad habits when it comes to password management. And it's because it's a hassle. Like, remembering a multitude of passwords for the hundreds of different apps you have is an absolute nightmare. And so what we end up doing often is coming up with something we remember really easily, which often isn't that secure, or even if it is secure, we end up using the same password for multiple sites, which means obviously if one gets hacked, so if there's a security breach or one of the apps you put that password into isn't particularly robust, they get hacked, they get your password, and then they could potentially use that for other sites as well. So there's lots of reasons why having a good password is a sensible idea. And people often, one workaround, I should say, is that people say would use their browser to save their passwords in a password vault, like Google has it, or Microsoft Edge, or Brave, or whatever browser you're using. And you put your password in, and it saves the password to your browser, and then it's all nice and secure. You don't have to remember them, which is great when you're using that browser. But then maybe you're using a different browser and you don't have access to the password, so it becomes an absolute hassle on your mobile phone, for example, and it's not shared. That can be a real hack, or it just doesn't recognize it for some reason. But also, when you start working with a team and you want to share those passwords to other people, they're on your browser in your login, so you can't give anyone else that password without doing the forbidden thing, which is to copy that password and then send it via an email or a text message or something unsecurely, unencrypted to that person so they can start using it. And even if you use WhatsApp or something, which is apparently completely secure and encrypted, the problem is that actually maintaining those passwords, updating them, keeping track of who's got access to what becomes a real nightmare. And so for all those reasons, and I've talked about this before, I recommend using an app sort of like LastPass or Bitwarden to manage your passwords and share them relatively securely with your teams. And I'm not going to go into that today because I've discussed the benefits of using an apps like LastPass in the past. But what I want to talk today about is about how you can leverage using those types of apps, not only for the convenience and the security of when you're sharing stuff across the internet and you're working with a team, but also with the view to having brilliant passwords for every single one of your sites, unique, brilliant passwords for every single one of your sites, without having to remember any of them, but also with having them locked really securely behind an awesome master password. So the first thing is about creating awesome passwords for all of your sites, unique passwords, but also meeting the high security standards, say they're 20 plus characters, uppercase, lowercase numbers, special characters, jumbled up order, not any word in the dictionary, all that sort of stuff. And that's actually really easy to do because most of these apps, the good ones anyway, have a password generation tool. And you can select how long it's going to be, what mix of characters you want. So, for whatever site you're using, it may have certain conditions you have to meet. You're only allowed to use certain types of characters, or it has to be a certain length or whatever. So you can specify all that, click a button, it generates a completely random password who's super secure. You put that in, save it, and it automatically then saves that password into the app, so Bitwarden or LastPass. And therefore, you don't have to remember it because it's in your password safe. And that password safe, unlike a browser, can be shared across any browser, any device, any app. If you're on your desktop, if you're on your mobile phone, if you're on Chrome, if you're on Safari, it's cross-platform. So it means that you can access that password super easy from anywhere because it's saved in the password app and it's totally secure. So that means you can have totally unique passwords that you don't even know for all of your apps. And the only thing left then is to make sure that access to that safe, to your password manager app, is totally secure. Now, this is the one password that you're going to have to remember, because if you forget this, then you're going to lose access to all of those passwords. So it can be a bit scary. And for that reason, I speak to clients and we promote the use of this stuff to our clients. And when I speak to them about the robustness or the complexity of their passwords, sometimes they're really not. And people hold their hands up and say, "Oh, it's just one I've used for years. I use it, for everything. I'm also using it for my master password." That's not a good idea. And often these passwords could be like your son's name and his birthday or something like that, which is actually not a great way to do it. So there are really simple things you can do. And one way to do this is, instead of using a word like password 1234, which is a terrible password, by the way, is to think of a phrase. So it could be something like, my first dog's name was Holly. Using that as a password, but mixing it up a bit. So maybe put an exclamation mark at the beginning, sticking a number at the end, putting a capital M or a capital for the first letter of every word, and then putting an apostrophe dogs, an apostrophe S, and maybe throwing in, as I said, a number at the end, which I've already said. And so that could look something like, exclamation mark, my first dog, apostrophe, then S, then name was Holly, 42, something like that. So you can basically create a really strong 28 characters in length. It's pretty much uncrackable, and it's pretty memorable as well. But I like to take it sort of one step further, but without actually making it any more difficult. And I can't remember where I learned this, if I'm honest, but somebody somewhere along the line gave me this little tip, and I want to share it with you now. So the way I create my super secure passwords is a similar take, a take on that idea. So I have an expression or phrase that I remember, and then I build a password around that phrase, but in a slightly different way. So let's take the phrase, for example. The place I like most in the world is Spain because it's hot. Now, obviously, I just made that up, but the idea is that you've got quite a long sentence which you're going to remember. Something memorable about you. So I actually have one sort of about my work, and I have one about one of my favorite holiday destinations. This is where I got this idea from. And I know them, and I can use them because it's familiar to me. It's something that it's not just made up. It's not just something random. It's familiar to me, so I remember it. So it can be quite long. But I'm then going to take, the difference here is, I'm going to take the first letter of each word in that phrase and use that as my password. So in this example, it becomes that the place I like most in the world is Spain because it's hot, becomes TPILTMITWISBISH. That is a random collection of letters. It's not even got a single word in there. It's around 15 characters long, so it's pretty good length, and it is completely uncrackable from the point of view of a human trying to guess what that password is. And then we jazz it up a bit to make it even more secure. We'll chuck a capital letter at the beginning. We'll use lowercase for the rest of them. You replace, for example, your I's, replace them with either ones or exclamation marks, and then just stick a number at the end. And if you fancy it, stick a dollar sign instead of the S. Whatever system you come up with that you use consistently across all your passwords so you don't get confused, then you can then create really complex passwords, totally uncrackable, with a mad mix of letters. So this is a bit boring repeating. So we're going to go through the what that password looks like when you apply that simple process of mixing it up using the passphrase, and it is totally uncrackable. So it becomes capital T, P, exclamation mark, I, T, M, exclamation mark, T, W, exclamation mark, S, B, exclamation mark, 5, H, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, that is just a nonsense string of characters, but that's cool because that's exactly what we want. But it's also super easy to remember. The place I like most in Spain is in the world is Spain because it's hot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, I can remember that, forever. And it's also, as I said, a totally cool, uncrackable password. So I strongly encourage you, if you use a password save, to look at your master password and make sure it is a good length, like 20 characters long. And if you're struggling to come up with an idea or come up with a word you can think of, a phrase you can think of, or sorry, a password you can think of, then use that idea of actually using a phrase and mixing it up to actually make a really strong, secure password that is totally uncrackable. And if you're not using a password safe yet, I encourage you to do it, and then use the password safe generator to create unique, completely random passwords for every single password in your world, and then change those relatively regularly. And I have talked about this before in an episode, but I'll bring it up now because it's super relevant. So we have a really simple system in our business for the changing of our passwords. And we have literally hundreds of sites. I think we're about 140 something sites that we use relatively regularly in our business. But when a staff member leaves, like, to be secure, we need to change the passwords that they've had access to, because even if you're using something like LastPass or Bitwarden, once you share that password with them and they then put it into the enter your password here on a browser, that password is then actually no longer encrypted in the software. You've pasted it in. And if you're not sure about what I'm talking about, just next time you try to log into Google, you'll put your password in and there's a little button that says show password. So if you share your password with someone, say for a Google account, I'm not saying you should ever share your Google password with anyone, but just as an example, if you shared your password with somebody, you would share it secured with them through the LastPass or for example. They would then use that LastPass to fill the password on the screen so they can log in. And once it's filled, they can click that view password and see what your password is. So it's really important that you do regularly change your passwords, because it's possible once you give someone the password, even if you give it them like I say encrypted, that once they've got it, they can probably view it. And so we couldn't possibly, well, we could, but it'd be an absolute pain in the ass to actually change 140 plus passwords every time somebody left the company, especially if we're like working with contractors, whatever, on a short-term basis. And so we divide our passwords into passwords that are absolutely must change. So CRM, if we ever share those, we typically don't share CRM passwords. We create users, but anything we like is mission critical. Like our Canva app, for example, may not sound like a mission critical app, but it has all of our graphic design work in it now. It's a massively valuable resource for us. So if staff members had access to that, we want to then change that password so there's no chance of anything malicious or accidental happening in the future by somebody who no longer works for us. So we split our passwords into mission critical and not so mission critical. So not so mission critical could be, say we've got a free account with a GIF generator or an image stock library, a free stock library. It's got nothing that we own in there. It's just something we access and use. And so if we lost the password for it, we can't log in, it's not the end of the world. No one can delete anything from it that's going to cause any harm. And so that's what we put into the second category, which we're not so worried about. And then when somebody leaves, we just have a look down the list, and because we use a password app like LastPass, we can see exactly what we've shared with that person, and so we can very easily then just change the password for the mission critical stuff that they've had access to. And that now reduces the number of passwords we need to change on a regular basis by, from 140 plus whatever down to maybe 10 for any particular employee, or depending on the role, obviously. But that way we are constantly updating our passwords. We're using super secure passwords. We're making sure that we're not sharing, we're not reusing the same password anytime within our business, and also in my personal stuff. And that way, hopefully, we're staying as secure as we can. That's about it. So that is my tips on why you should be using secure passwords, how you can create awesome, long, really secure passwords by just being a little bit creative, using a phrase, first letter of each of the words, and then mixing it with some special characters and numbers and all the rest of it. It's super easy to do, super easy for you to remember them. And if you're, as I said, using some sort of app, then once you've got your master password, whether that's for your if you are working by yourself, then your Google password needs to be your super secure one, and then that will then give you access to your browser. Or if you're using a password app and you're working with a team, then it will be your master password for the app that you'd apply this to. Everything else you can have as jumbled letters generated using a password generator, so you don't need to remember them, because that's the whole point of using a password manager. And that's it. Hope that's helpful. If you found this useful, please do leave us a review, hit subscribe, hit like, give us some stars if you're on your podcast or listening to on the podcast. And 5 is always nice. So thank you very much indeed. It's been a pleasure, and I'll see you next time. Thanks very much.